Welcome back. My name is Quincy, and this is the Social Drop In. If you are coming in from the last episode, I want to say thank you for joining me. Today, I'm going to be talking a little bit about some of my life experiences while traveling. So that'll be kind of exciting. So just to give you a little brief introduction of what exactly this podcast is about, my podcast, The Social Drop In, is really just going to be a sort of like mixing bowl of everything that's going on in life. So it's going to be sort of like a mix of relationships, travel, business, social media, music industry. I have a lot of experience and have my hand in a lot of different pots, so I feel like I have a lot of good stories, and I have a lot of good advice and just kind of things to make everyone feel like they can, everybody can listen to this. So I'm really excited to get started. Today, I just wanted to give myself a pat on the back. It is literally 7 days of doing the 75 hard. It's really exciting for me because I seriously, I eat too much junk. I drink too much sometimes. I don't exercise. I definitely quit reading. I do a lot of my own research and stuff through podcasts. So this is kind of exciting for me. I've been working out close to 90 minutes a day. And that's been really cool. Great for my mental health. I've been able to be really consistent in a diet, cooking. Those are some of the things that I really love to do. So very proud of myself, giving myself a little pat on the back for that. That's been really great sort of like for my mental health. And the only thing I would like to improve on is really just my sleep. I haven't seemed to been able to get on a sleeping schedule, especially with alcohol. I know that in the past when I've done like sober January or something, it takes a little bit for your body to get kind of readjusted. I also have a client that is a bar, so I spend a lot of my time going to that business kind of late at night and shooting content and stuff. So I think that definitely has something to do with it. If not, it's definitely all the Netflix that I watch too. I wanted to talk a little bit about traveling today. I think I mentioned in the first episode how much traveling means to me. Honestly, it truly is like my biggest passion in the world. I want to spend as much time as I can exploring other cultures and, just making memories. I've been super interested in traveling as long as I've been like a kiddo. I really have. I used to have this giant picture of like Paris on my wall when I was like in middle school, high school, and it was of Paris, and I was like, man, I'm going to go there someday. And I swear I manifested it because shortly after that, my best friend and I ended up going together, which is really fun. I'll get into that story here in just a little bit. But yeah, it's like such a passion for mine. I found that both going to college and then spending a lot of time traveling, I would rather travel than go to college because I feel like traveling taught me a lot about the world, but it also taught me a lot about money, time management. It taught me a lot about organization. It taught me a lot about just life in general, how to like operate a train system, how to operate like buy my own flight, how to be self-sufficient and confident really. Like there's a lot of attributes that go into being able to travel. And especially if you solo travel, which is another story I'll get into in a little bit. But yeah, that's kind of something that I wanted to start off. I have a couple of kind of hot opinions about traveling that I think I'll kind of give like advice at the very end. But before we get started, I did just want to say that this first story here is kind of crazy. So if you are a nanny, be warned. I actually just told this story on my TikTok, I think yesterday. It's kind of a long one, but this is literally the story of me getting abandoned in Italy when I was there as a travel nanny. This story is and always has been like super traumatic to me, like even still to this day. This was like probably 7 years ago, and it still is hard to talk about, and I still have some resentment in my heart. Obviously, it was like really scary. But anyways, just to preface that, I mentioned this in the first episode. I've been really fortunate to find some really incredible families. However, the very first family that I worked with was awful. And it wasn't awful to like when I was working there, it was more awful after the fact. So I spent almost like a year and a half, 2 years working with this family. There was 2 kids, and then a mom and a dad. They weren't like uber rich or anything like that, but they had this really nice house. They both worked, and I remember just being like super, inspired by them. And it was actually at that time that I was like actually starting to research being a social media manager and like remote jobs. And I super just really love to travel. One of the boys actually had like a learning disability, and they didn't know that he couldn't hear for like the first 2 years of his life. So he really sort of like at this point developed some sort of behavioral kind of issues where he like kind of acted out to get attention, where he couldn't express himself because he didn't learn any of those things growing up, like what you would have if you were hearing. The little girl, she was super sweet, and I worked for them and I really enjoyed it for a lot of the time. But unfortunately, the mom, she got let go from her job like very suddenly. And so when she came home that day, she told me that I also lost my job that day. So that sucked ass. But you know what? I guess it is what it is. They paid me like an extra week, which was nice, but it was like right before Thanksgiving, and I was like, shit, like, I gotta find a job. Thankfully, right after that, this was like during care.com. Right after that, I was able to hop on and find another family, another really, really, really sweet family. I loved working with them as well. However, while I worked for this family, let's say that one is A family and this one is B family. While I was working for B family, I got asked by A family if I wanted to go to Italy with them. And obviously, I have a commitment to B family because I'm their full time nanny. I also was in college at the time. I really, really had to like kind of think it through and decide if that's something I wanted to do. However, like the really excited like traveler in me was like, hell yeah, let's do this. So I talked with B family and I kind of expressed myself, and they're very, very supportive about traveling in general. And so they were like, yeah, like we'll find other coverage. Like don't worry about it at all. And so I was like, okay, let's do this. However, this is where it gets a little tricky because when I was first texting with the mom from A family about this, when they asked me, I was like, yeah, heck yeah. Like I even remember I have all the receipts to this story, by the way. So call me out. I'll show you the receipts. But I was like, hell yeah, like, count me in, whatever. And they're like, okay, cool. So then she booked everything and she was like, I'll send you an email later on with all the details and everything like that. And so I was like, okay, perfect. So later on we got to talking, and I got the email of everything and I was looking it through, and I was like, okay, cool. Like at first she sold me on like having my own room. She kind of told me that I was going to have time off. And because I was, like I said, I was a student, so I was like, I really have to stay on top of my tasks at home. I can't like just fall off the wayside here. And it was really important to me to like, be able to explore the culture, but also kind of have moments to myself where I wasn't like watching kids the whole time. And that was totally agreed upon at the time. However, she did mention to me that there would be no payment for this job, which again, the young traveler in me was like, hell yeah, we're going to Italy. Let's do it. So we go to Italy. On the way to Italy, I got so sick on the plane. I'm talking like I was just literally vomiting the entire time. I had never been so sick on an airplane before. I was like literally turned around in my seat on the floor, like put my head there because I was so nauseous. I never get like sick on a plane, so that was a weird experience for me. And then when we got to Italy, obviously I just felt like shit. I was like, man, I really got to sleep this off. Like, I'm not feeling good. I'm not going to be worth anything if I don't like, kind of catch up on what I'm doing here. So what I did from there is we like ended up in Nettuno, Italy, which is like, I don't even know why. No offense to the people in Nettuno, but it's like, it's not like Rome or anything. So anyways, we get to Nettuno and we stay in this Airbnb, and it's like this tiny little hotel. It's not a hotel. It's like it was an Airbnb, but it was like just this tiny little apartment. And what was meant to be a private room was actually a pull-out couch in the middle of the living room. And I was like sick. So once we got to Nettuno, that was kind of my first kind of like, okay, this is weird. After that, they were like, yeah, go ahead, like you can stay in our room just to like take a nap, and we're gonna go out and we'll come back. I was like, okay, sick, thank you very much. So I go and I take a nap, and by the time that they get back, I'm up, and I was like, hey, I'm so sorry, like I'm feeling so much better. And we get to like going on a dinner together, and things were chill. All right, well, there's a little bit of drinking that happens at the dinner, like myself included, and maybe a little glass or so. Well, there's more drinking that goes on once we get back to the little apartment and the kids go to bed, and we're just sitting there talking, like the three of us. This was kind of my first experience doing that with a family. So I was like, I wasn't even sure, like, sort of what my boundaries were. And so that was really interesting for me. But I remember it got kind of awkward because the dad, like, was making comments about, like, Jennifer Aniston and, like, her boobs and horrible bosses, and, like, it was just sort of, that's like a weird detail that I remember, so I don't know. But anyways, so they like stay up like till like almost 1 in the morning. I'm assuming because they're jet lagged, but talking in the living room. And mind you, like that is my bed. That's the only place that I can sleep. As I mentioned earlier, I wasn't feeling good. I've already had some glasses of wine, and I'm ready to lay down. And it's like I can't. So that was like kind of my first like experience with this family traveling. After this, we go over to Rome. Also, I realize this is a lot of context, but it's just kind of a story that I think deserves all these different details because it all sort of makes sense towards the end. Once we get to Rome, we go to this Airbnb that is like massive, so beautiful. It looks like an art gallery in there. Whoever decorated it had like amazing taste. And also, it was like literally like front door right to the Trevi Fountain, the big old fountain where you make a wish. So I guess that's every mountain, or mountain. That's every fountain. But anyways, this one's really special in Italy. Anyhow, it was beautiful. I definitely had my own room there, and it was great. In fact, like it's such a big Airbnb that majority of their family was staying there. And so the whole trip, actually, I forgot to mention this, was based around um, the husband of a family, the husband and wife that I worked for, his mom and dad, it was their 50th wedding anniversary. And so they were coming to Italy, and their whole family was coming along, and everybody was staying sort of like right there in that center there. And so I had my own room, that everybody had their own space. And so that's kind of how it started. Of course, we go to dinner, we have a great time. I'm hanging with the kiddos. That was my sort of like intro into how to react with kids around that sort of environment. Like, how much am I supposed to do? If a kid starts throwing a plate or something, am I supposed to get on to them? Are they supposed to get on to them? Well, it turns out that I had to take responsibility for everything with the children. I feel like it was crazy. And I remember when we first got to that Airbnb, we got there and everybody showed up, and the 2-year-old that I mentioned before starts having a fit, like a full-on sort of like breakdown. And I can understand it's like a new place. There's a lot of people there. There's just like a lot of energy, and they just weren't really getting the attention I think they were expecting. And I remember he was just throwing a fit, and I was like, come over here, like, come here. And he was like slamming the door. And I remember the mom got on to me, and she was like, you can't talk to him like that. Like, he's got issues. And I'm like, okay, like I didn't do anything to upset him. I'm telling him to come here, but okay, why don't you chase after your son? Excuse me, let me pump the brakes there. Anyhow, so we get to go in on this little trip. First night goes well. We go out to dinner, like I mentioned, and then the next day we had like a whole thing planned, like going to the Colosseum, the Palestine, things like that. Or the, I really should have like researched the names and how to pronounce them all on here because I'm kind of sounding uneducated, but I trust you. I remember. We go and have this beautiful day, right? We go and have a lunch during that day, and in the evening, everybody was kind of just chilling out. So good first day. The second day, we wake up and do something else like that. And we get through the day, but halfway through the day, I remember that the kids were really tired and they needed to go and take a nap. I was like, perfect, I'll take them back. You guys do your thing, and we'll meet back up later. Well, they came back later on that night, and I remember that we ended up just staying in that night. And because the following day, they were having a dinner with the governor of Italy, as they said. Who knows? But anyways, they're going and doing this. And I just mentioned to them, like, at this point, I haven't had, like, really any time to do any of my schoolwork. We've been go, go, go. And, like, obviously, when I'm going to see the Colosseum, I'm not going to be, like, really super, like, worried about, you know, my homework. But let me tell you, when I'm sitting at this Airbnb and I'm sort of just watching these kids, all I can think about is, oh my gosh, my work is piling up. Like, I need to sort of prioritize this later on. And so when they were like, hey, we're going to go have this dinner, I was like, perfect. Hey, if you don't mind though, I just really need to have some time to myself later. Like, I just have to catch up on my schoolwork. And they're like, yeah, for sure. So they go out on this dinner. And I'm alone with the kids, super easy night, something I'm super used to. And I put them to bed and I'm like, okay, cool. I'm going to work on my schoolwork a little bit. And then all of a sudden the kid's waking up and like the other kid wakes up. And it's like every time that I had a minute to like kind of sit down and work on something, it was like interrupted. By the time that the family got back, it was like 1 in the morning. And I obviously am like kind of pissed because I'm like, man, I really asked for like one thing. I'm not really having a lot of time to myself here. And I just really need to like work on my schoolwork. That's kind of like the agreement from the beginning. And so when the mom and dad got home, I was like, hey, can I talk to you real quick to the mom? And so we went outside and talked. And I just remember telling her that, like, hey, like, I'm not feeling very comfortable. I feel like this isn't what we agreed upon. I'm not having the time to do what I need to do. And I just felt like a lot of pressure and a lot of stress. And I just told her, like, hey, I think I kind of want to go home. And she was like, obviously kind of taken aback by it, but she was like, okay, like, I understand. She was like, it's kind of annoying that like we brought you out here and you're leaving, but you know, I think I remember her saying like, well, we can't keep you here. And I was like, okay. And I was like, okay, thank you, like, I appreciate you understanding. Is there any way that I can reuse my ticket home to like transfer it to earlier? And she was like, yeah, I hope you do that. And so we go back inside and I pull up my laptop and she's helping me log in to look at the flight. And I guess she was like, hold on a second, let me get the details. She goes to get her details, and I guess the husband and her have a conversation. And he got so pissed. He came storming through the house in his underwear, screaming and yelling, talking about how selfish I was, talking about how ungrateful that I was, how like I didn't deserve to be on this trip, how I'm just like, just everything. It was like so traumatizing kind of to like have, not really traumatizing because I'm pretty, I'm okay with people telling me how they feel, but like that was definitely something weird in the side of this person that I had never seen before, especially since we had a professional relationship. So at that point, it just like shit really hit the fan in that moment. And so I'm obviously crying. And the last thing the dad says to me is like, pack your shit, get the fuck out of here. And I'm like, what the fuck? I just remember that I was just like, I don't know what to do. Like, I don't have this flight home. And so I like close the door and I lock it. I remember specifically. And when I lock the door, I'm like trying to pack my stuff because I don't know. I felt like I had to protect myself. And so basically, whenever I was kind of getting into packing my stuff, I remember thinking like, man, I really, really, really need to figure out what I'm going to do. And so at the time, I was in this Facebook group called Girls Love Travel. I love this group. It's like, it's been a part of my life now for probably like 10 years. It's the best. Anyways, I wrote in there and I was like, hey, I explained the whole situation. And at this point, it's like probably 3 in the morning. And I'm like, I don't know what to do. Like, I'm about to get thrown out of this house. Like, if there's, what should I do? I don't know how to do this. Like, I don't have the money to buy a new flight, whatever. And within like probably 20 to 30 minutes, people were commenting left and right, basically offering me money, offering me a place to stay in Italy. It was like all of that stuff to say, like, I really needed that stuff in the moment. I typically wouldn't accept stuff like that just because I'm not like, if I don't need it, I'm not going to use it type of person. I'd rather that go to somebody that really needs it. And at that moment, I really needed it. But I got this message from somebody and she was like, hey, she was so, so sweet. She really just out of the kindness of her heart bought me a flight home with her airline miles. And I was like shocked. First of all, I didn't really even understand what that meant. And I didn't realize now, in hindsight, 7 years later, and I know how important miles are, I'm like, wow, that was like really such a generous offer that she did. Moving on from that, I pack up all my stuff now that I have this. At this point, they're literally like walking me down from the Airbnb. They're literally kicking me out. I have my shit and I'm like standing outside of this really nice Airbnb right next to this really famous fountain. I want to take a minute just to put this in perspective for somebody that like maybe hasn't traveled overseas before. Imagine you being like 18, I think I was like 18 or 19, I'd have to do the math, 18 years old, in a country you've never been, you don't speak the language, you don't have your own money, your phone's about to die, you just had the most stressful, traumatizing experience that you've ever had in your life, and now you're out on the street not knowing what's about to happen to you. I will say this because at this point, I've been to like over 20 countries. I love to travel. There is no other place that I've been to where there are homeless people like I saw in Rome. That, like, still to this day, there is nothing I've ever seen like that before. I really don't want to go into depth about it, but it was really, I remember seeing a homeless woman like on the way there, and I just like, yeah, I'm getting a little emotional talking about it, but I wasn't sure what I was going to expect, but I was getting kind of thrown out on the street, and I thought for sure that I was going to get sort of like messed with like a homeless person. Where I come from, I live in Austin, Texas. There's a huge homeless population here, unfortunately, and a lot of times they can be sort of aggressive or pushy or, at times even violent. I've heard 100 different stories, so I wasn't even sure what to expect, and thankfully nothing happened. I got to a place like across from right next to the fountain is a bunch like of open area where there's a bunch of restaurants and stuff. I remember earlier in the day that I was able to connect to Wi-Fi there, so I stood right next to it and got Wi-Fi outside of that building, and I downloaded Uber and I got an Uber to the airport. Mind you, I had been up all day, all night too. At this point, it's probably close to around like 4:30, almost 5, and so I call this Uber and they come and pick me up, and the whole time I'm in the Uber, I'm just swaying back and forth, and I'm like, because I just was trying to close my eyes, but I was trying to stay awake too. It was just such an awful feeling. At this point, I make it to the airport, I get on my flight, and I make it home. The rest of that story, there is no justification that comes from it, honestly. There was no rectification. It was really sort of like a dead end from that point. There was no justice served. And so I think that's where I still have a little bit of resentment in my heart. However, let bygones be bygones. You can go and get the hell on, you and your mama. Hell yeah. I never understood that phrase more than I do now. Okay, so that wasn't even my first time leaving the country. That was my second time. And that was just like such a weird experience, but the first experience I had was also really, really fun and also sort of a learning experience as well. I want to mention that this story involves my very best friend. Her name's Nicole. We have literally grown up together, and Nicole, she shared the same love as travel for me, the same sort of like wanting to explore, and so we were able to really like kind of get on this same wave. And I remember when we were in Austin, this was probably after a couple years of living here, I was chilling at her apartment and we were just looking at this site called Norwegian Air. We were able to get a one-way flight, I think from Fort Lauderdale to Copenhagen, Denmark for $300 something. And we were like amazed. We couldn't believe this. This was in 2018, so the Italy trip must have been in 2019. We didn't even buy a return ticket at the time because we were like, we don't know when we're going to come back. So we were like, man, let's kind of plan our trip and we'll figure it out down the line. She bought our one way there and I was going to buy the one way home, whatever we decided to do. We just started planning and we could not stop adding countries onto our trip. We had already decided we wanted to go sort of like around a couple different areas. We ended up, I think, going to like 8 different countries. And we span that out over 30 days. Holy shit. If you are somebody that has traveled like extensively and you know exactly how it goes, that is not a marathon. That is a sprint. Because not only are you spending so much time going back and forth and traveling and lugging all your crap, but it's also like a little bit of time in these little places. So like a day or two before you have to hit the next spot and get on this train and like do that. And so that was definitely something that we learned. We bought this thing called the Eurorail, and it was like $500, I think, and it gave you access to all of the trains and all of the different countries we wanted to go to. So we bought it. That was going to be what we thought like cheaper than having to individually like buy tickets to all these places. we started to just make our outline of what we were going to do. And we broke it down to day by day. And I think we spent about like 30 or 31 days there. I really did not know how to budget my money then. And I had this idea that I could just like live off like I think $30 a day or something. And so I was like, okay, cool. I think I saved like maybe $1,000 or something. I can't even remember. But let me tell you, $1,000 across 8 countries in 30 days is really not a lot. So I had a really tough time while I was there. And I also will mention while I was there, this is like a big factor to that trip and what I experienced is that I was pretty overweight at the time, and I basically had no stamina. I had like no energy to, walk long walks. Me and Nicole got into this fight while we were there because she was like, let's go to this thing. It's like a mile down the street. And I was like, a mile? I was like, I'll just call a Lyft. Like, I can't walk a mile. And she's like, Quincy, yes, you can. Like, we've been doing it all this time. And I'm like, I did not want to do it. I want to call an Uber. Oh my gosh. Now I walk a mile or 3 or 4 miles a day now. So yeah. Anyways, I was a little different. My eating habits were different then. My like lifestyle was different. She and I had complete different traveling styles. She wanted to wake up and hit the sunrise and go all day long. I was like, let's go in and have sort of like a late morning start, really ease into the day, like enjoy it, and then we can really hang out at the night. I'm kind of a night owl, so I guess that's probably where it came from, but we had so much fun. We did get into some tiffs while we were there just because it's like 30 days with a single person is really a lot. I've even traveled with my husband for that long, and I will tell you that it's a lot. The only thing I will say about that is it definitely taught me to budget your money correctly, and it also taught me not to go to 8 countries in 30 days. So, that being said, with all of the lessons I was learning, I still could not stop wanting to travel. And at this point, this is the end of 2019. And I was like ready for a redemption trip. I was really going for like country after country after country. I was really living my best life back then. And I remember I was making like $1,000 a week nannying, and I was just saving it left and right. And if you listen to the first episode, you know that like I worked for a family that basically I got 4 months out of the year off, like paid free, which was super generous. But then planned a solo trip to Australia, New Zealand, and Hawaii. And so I took also about actually closer to like 5 weeks on this trip. I was so scared. This was a life-changing trip. And I say that for so many different reasons, but it genuinely was. And I will say this, I was really overweight in that trip that we went to Europe with Nicole. This trip, I had lost over 100 pounds, probably 110 pounds. And there's a whole lot of other context, like emotionally what I was going through, but I was just so sort of like, my mind was not caught up with like what my body was experiencing. And so I felt like I really just needed to push myself to do something that sort of scared me and helped me grow more than I already had. So I decided to go on this trip solo. I wasn't willing to give it up because nobody wanted to go with me. And so I started off 10 days in Hawaii. I stayed with a friend there on Honolulu. It was absolutely stunning. I actually also shout out to my friend Vicky. She probably won't listen to this, but if she does, thanks Vicky. She actually helped me like travel plan my entire trip for me. She lived in Queenstown at the time in New Zealand, and she literally like verbatim took me through step by step where I was going to sleep, what I was going to do. I told her, I was like, here's my credit card. I had like a $5,000 limit. I was like, go ahead, like just put everything on there, plan it for me. I'm going to do it regardless. Holy shit, she definitely had me doing everything and then some, and they were like the scariest things. In Hawaii, I ended up diving with sharks, which was really cool. That was kind of a unique experience. From there, I flew to Australia, and I went all through Australia. It was really fun. I bounced around to different places, and I spent a lot more time on like the Gold Coast, and it was really important to me to like kind of when I get to these countries, I wanted to really, go and experience sort of like the indigenous side of it and kind of explore the history there. And so I went and stayed on this place called Fraser Island. Fraser Island is they call it, I can't remember what they call it. It was like Killer Island or something like that because everything wants to kill you on it. It's like where all the dingoes live, all the big poisonous spiders live. There's like just everything that wants to kill you is there. And so I was like, okay, I don't know what I'm getting myself into, but it was like basically staying a few days like in this little travel group at this sort of like retreat. And it was where the indigenous people lived when they were there, and they kind of went around and taught you exactly like how they lived and what they did. And so it was really interesting to me to really have that sort of like homegrown experience. I learned how to drive on the other side of the road on the beach. We saw a couple dingoes. I saw a giant huntsman spider that was scary. Actually, a crazy time that happened there is that we were driving through the jungle on this island, and we were going to see like some, I can't remember if it was like sea otters or if it's sea turtles or something like that. And we went out to this place and we looked at them all, and then when we were driving back, this giant tree fell. And there's that saying, it's like, if a tree fell in the forest, would anybody hear it? It's like, no, we did not hear it. We had no clue. We went, there's only one way in and one way out. And so all of the people in this trip were like having to help move this tree. They like wrapped around these chains and were trying to pull it, and the tree snapped, but then inside was that giant huntsman spider. And I have a picture of it. It's like crazy. But anyways, that was kind of scary for a minute because we were like, fuck, we don't know how we're going to get out of here. But anyways, moving on from there, I went to a couple other places. I spent some time in some like weird Australian towns, really small ones. And then I had so many amazing experiences. And then I popped over to New Zealand. When I was in New Zealand, I had such a great time. I started at the top of New Zealand and I went to, it's Waikiki or Wakeke. If you're from New Zealand and you hear this, please also listen to the first half where I couldn't pronounce anything in Italy either. It has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with me. Anyways, so we're at this really sort of like secluded island at the top of New Zealand, and it's funny enough because walking through this forest, there's actually this giant tree. It's like 300 years old, and it's this giant tree. They call it the Tree of Life. And the creator of Avatar actually wrote Avatar based off this one tree. And it was so cool to see it in your own eyes. And while I was there, I did some like zip lining. I went through this zip line that was like, oh my God, I can't even tell you, like so high, like skyscraper high, across all of these like forests and stuff. I have a video of that too. I can't bring myself to actually delete any of this in my phone because sometimes I look back at it and it makes me smile. And it was a lot of things like that where I was just like taking in all of this culture. I was also challenging myself to be so open and sort of accepting to things that even scared me. And then I went on to Rotorua, which is another sort of like part random, I wouldn't say rural, but it was like definitely very sort of like, there was crickets basically. And the reason for going there is because there is a tribe there, the indigenous people, the Maori people, they were there always. It was like their land. They have traditions and everything. I was able to actually go to their little sanctuary, like where they all live and stay, and be a part of sort of like a dinner thing that they did where they cook all the meal underneath the ground. You got to like witness all of their dancing and their culture, learn more about it, and like really pay your respects to those people. And that was like, that's exactly like one of my bucket list things that I wanted to do. I really enjoyed it and loved it there. And actually, like, they have these really cool, like, kind of, they're not machetes because they're made out of wood, but they're like these, if you've ever seen Moana, sorry to compare the two, but like in Moana, there's like these shaped sort of like wooden things that they use. And anyways, they're very special. And so I actually ended up buying one. But anyhow, after that, I went down to Queenstown. That was like, I fell in love with Queenstown. I can't even get into sort of the explicit things that I experienced there. But I will say that it stole my heart. When people ask me what my favorite country is, I always say Queenstown, New Zealand, because to me, it has my favorite like scenery place in the world is Banff, Canada. It is absolutely stunning, like 360. You can't even believe it. But So that's what it was like in Queenstown. Like, you can't even believe it looking around. But the nightlife was here in Austin, which, if you are familiar with Austin, it's like 6th Street. It's super fun. But anyhow, I fell in love with it there. And that was sort of like the end of my trip. Oh, the last thing I will say about that is that I remember I was in Christchurch and they have an airport there. This is like a culture shock for me. They had a airport there where basically there was no security whatsoever. There was no checking your bags. There was nothing like that. You literally just walk up, you check in, and wait for your flight. And I'm like, what the hell? I remember I was like sweating bullets before I got on that plane because I'm like, I don't know what's about to happen. Please help me, whatever. And so, yeah, that was sort of the conclusion to my solo trip. I did a lot of things that scared me there. There was more that I didn't include in this story, but I say that it's life-changing because truly that brought my mind full circle to my body. And I feel like it was just, if you are into astrology, if you're into tarot or anything like that, that was sort of like my tower moment where like everything built up and everything fell over and it was like a brand new chapter for me. And since then, it's been chapter after chapter and it's been nothing but great. So I'm really, really happy for that trip. I'm really grateful also being able to experience that, and also grateful to myself for being able to, challenge myself to be stronger and grow. So yay me. The last story I want to talk about, because I already know this episode is kind of long, is my honeymoon. I got married last April, and I'll have to do a whole separate video on our whole separate episode on just my wedding, because that was its own beast. But I remember getting into the wedding planning process and I was like, oh my God, I don't want to do this. I was like, let's please elope, please. I was like, I didn't want to plan all of it because if you know me, I'm a very type A, organized, very like creative, extreme person. If you've been to any of my house parties, you know I go all out. If you go on any trips, I have it all outlined and planned out, ready to go. I'm very like that. And so when I start to get into that mode, I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to be hell. Also, because I knew right when we got engaged that I was like, I'm going to take like a minimum a year to do whatever I want to do. Plan this honeymoon 30 days in Italy and Greece. The reason I bring up that first Italy trip and then this last Italy trip is because I truly believed I had to make it full circle. I had to do a redemption of Italy because I really honestly had such a disdain for it that I did not want to go back to Italy. But whenever I was thinking, I literally, since that Paris picture in my bedroom, Greece was always the place I wanted to spend my honeymoon. I couldn't even imagine another place in the world that I wanted to spend it. It's just something I always dreamt of. And so I already knew that we were going to go to Greece. But right next to Greece, across a little ocean there, not an ocean, but like a little peninsula, gulf, whatever, I don't know. Right in between there is Italy. And so again, I was like, that second trip where I'm like bouncing around to 8 different countries, I couldn't help myself. I was like, we're in Italy. We need to go to Milan. We got to go get tattooed by this like tattoo person that I like love. We have to go to, which is in Pavia, Italy, which I don't know if you know that place. Crickets. Like, again, I've been to some amazing cities in this world, but I've been to some really boring ones too. That's something that they don't tell you about traveling. From Milan, we moved on to a couple different places. We went from Naples and saw Pompeii and like Mount Vesuvius. That was incredible. We went to Sorrento and did like the whole Amalfi Coast, Positano. It was really incredible, all of it. After we got to doing that, we went back to Rome and then we flew to Greece. And once we got to Greece, we flew into Athens. I absolutely love Athens. If you want to go to Greece and you need some tips, please ask me because I have a lot of tips. And there's also another thing that I want to talk about in a separate episode is like sort of these ideas around countries and tourist places, and that sometimes they are a flop. So Athens was not a flop. It was like one of the best places I think that I've been to in a while. We ended up going there and seeing like the Parthenon, which is like where like the steps of like where Socrates and Plato and all of the sort of philosophers like walked on, and it was so cool, and like the Romans took over. There's so much history there. They have a museum actually like nearby, and it has all these statues from that time period. And this is kind of a weird fact here, but in that little museum is a bunch of statues, but Christians cut all the heads off of these statues because they thought it was demonic. And so they just cut them all off. And so a lot of the statues just they have their heads cut off. We got to see so many incredible things, and then from there we sort of island hopped Santorini, Mykonos, we went to Milos. We did so many incredible things on our honeymoon. I will tell you, as I spoke before, traveling with somebody for 30 days is a really, really interesting thing to do. You experience, this is my advice too. If you are getting into a new relationship, you're getting serious in a relationship, you have to take a trip together. I'm not saying a 30-day trip. You don't have to do that whatsoever, but you absolutely must take a trip together, and you have to find out how that person travels. You have to understand, like, how are they going to time manage? How are they going to kind of keep up with themselves? How do they feel under pressure, under stress, and financial strain? If they're lazy like I was and I wanted to sleep in and they wanted to get up, it was like you really have to get to know somebody like that, because that's what you're going to be dealing with for the rest of your life. Thankfully, my husband and I had an absolute amazing time. We're like literally two peas in a pod when it comes to traveling. Anytime I was ready for a nap, he was ready. Anytime I wanted to pop up and go get a coffee, he's like, let's go do it. Anytime I wanted to, go and stop in a random bar for an Aperol Spritz, he was down. So we really had a great time, a great honeymoon. Obviously, I married him. He married me. And so, yeah, that's kind of like a whole sort of like slew of different trips I've been on. This has been sort of a long-winded episode, so I'm going to end it here. But I just wanted to say, I again just want to say that I'm really fortunate for everything that I've experienced. And I also just want to say how grateful I am to myself for not giving up on my dreams and being able to sort of continue to pursue that biggest passion that I have. Because although I can't pursue it full time now, I will eventually, and I can't wait for that day. But also, I will, like I mentioned, start another episode and probably even a little series on traveling in general, just about like some unpopular opinions, some things that I think about. The thing I just want to leave on is that if you ever have the notion that you can't travel, that it's too expensive, I am going to teach you how you can. It is not that expensive. You won't be like living like me on that first trip to when I was going to all those countries, living on a $30 a day. That is not how it goes. So I will give those tips later on. But anyhow, thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Social Drop In. Again, my name is Quincy, and I can't wait to see you for the next episode.